From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI Podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, including how we can help you apply lean thinking, please visit lean.org.
Our guest today has one of the most hands-on lean journeys you'll hear. Jon Armstrong, co-founder and CEO of Do It American Manufacturing, learned TPS directly from Mr. Oba, a foremost expert in TPS at Toyota. Today, Jon's applying the lessons he learned from that experience to lead a thriving US-based manufacturing company. We'll explore how that learn-by-doing experience shaped him as a leader and how TPS principles make manufacturing competitive everywhere. Welcome, Jon. Thanks for joining us on the WLEI podcast.
My pleasure. Good to be here. Thank you.
So before we get into things, why don't you just take a moment and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your company.
Okay. So name's Jon Armstrong, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. So founded a company, it's been 17 years now, close to 18 years, called Do It American Manufacturing, and Do It American Manufacturing Company. And I know it's a long name and it's kind of a slogan, but we're really here to advocate and be a good example that you can and should manufacture here in the U.S. So we try to do things the right way, and the right way we consider TPS and making progress. And our primary customers are large public utilities, but we have a lot of different OEMs and products that we make for many different customers.
Fantastic. So Mark and I, who's with you conducting this conversation today, Mark and I got to meet you and spend a couple of days with you on a recent lean leadership learning tour where we had a chance to go visit Toyota, GE Appliances. Anyways, this is kind of a follow-up to some of the conversations that we had at that time. So Jon, before founding Do It American Manufacturing Company, you had an unusual opportunity to work directly with Toyota's TSSC group, the Toyota Production System Support Center group. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that engagement came about.
Sure. Man, did I luck out. I think I've been some ways just lucky in my career. I had some early on experiences even before TSSC, focused around some different flavors of lean manufacturing and probably some things that were not so lean. But ultimately, I got hired at a company out here in California called Walker. And I believe it was my very first day. I went into the company to work, and we got a letter from this guy named Mr. Hajime Oba. And I didn't know who he was, but it sounded pretty important. And it was basically a letter. They had engaged him. They were a Toyota, I wouldn't say a Toyota supplier at the time. They made a couple very basic parts, just non-critical parts to cover holes in a dashboard or something. And we got this letter from Mr. Oba that said, we're going to discontinue our relationship with you. And when I saw the letter, I'm thinking, Bruce, who was one of the brothers that owned the company at the time, I said, Bruce, this is critical. Let's call this guy. So we called him and had a conversation. Bruce convinced him that they hired this new guy that was going to champion this, and we should re-engage. So we did re-engage, and Mr. Oba came out and had kind of the funniest experience you could imagine. He just came out, walked the floor, and we walked the floor with him, and he talked to me a little bit, and then he said, I want you to understand your process. I want you to draw your process and make kind of I don't even know the word he used, but a flow diagram of your process. So then he left. And me and the owner's son, we took that to an extreme that you couldn't imagine. We basically drew a cartoon that plastered 3 sides of a very large conference room with the overly complex process they had in place to do stamping. And when Mr. Oba came back and saw this thing, he and Masahiro came back and saw this thing all over the wall. They basically decided we were nuts, and we would be great people to work with. And that's really where the whole relationship started. And it was just a wonderful experience that honestly changed my life and resulted in some successes and the company that we're building today.
That's fantastic. So sounds like you passed that initial test. So beyond that, once the engagement started, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, kind of what it was like to learn from people like Mr. Oba. I understand that there was also the involvement of a TSSC coach that both Mark and I know, Brian Sanders. So just tell us a little bit about what it was like to learn from those guys.
Yeah, there were several folks at TSSC that we worked with over time, and all of them were just fantastic people to deal with. Mr. Oba would show up periodically and check and see what was going on, and sometimes he'd spend quite a bit of time with us. But great experiences. I think, it was fascinating because I think one of the main things that I learned real quick is, and especially with Mr. Oba, because he didn't really say very much, you really had to work hard and pay attention to what he was paying attention to. And I think that was the key thing, is to try to understand in manufacturing and the processes what's important. They would tell you, but they wouldn't tell you by telling you. They'd tell you by paying attention to certain things. And I think that was a pretty important lesson. They never told you what to do. It absolutely drove me nuts, because I'm like, so how should we do this? What should we do? And they never answered. So you would have to learn by doing and experimenting, and it's a great way to do things. I think a couple of the tools that they used, and I think, we did repeated Kaizen events, right? So we did these things called Kaizen events, and so they would come out and we'd do one with a structured one with TSSC. We'd put different groups in it, and then we'd do them on our own. After a while, we were running these things on our own. I'd lead one, and then maybe I'd coach somebody else in our company to lead one. I think I probably ended up leading most of them. But the key thing that start to realize is setting up these Kaizen events. You'd set up and design the whole event using an A3, right? And the purpose of the A3 was really to make sure, my understanding was to make sure that your thinking was clear going into the event and exactly what your objectives were and what it was you were trying to accomplish. And then I think the other thing that was really interesting was the Kaizen events were just magical, very long, very grueling experiments. But the key was to do stuff quickly, start the event and stop the event with stuff in place that was going to stay in place. And it was really great. But the Kaizen event itself was not the improvement. And, we hear all this stuff about, improvement. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions where people, they think, well, the improvement, the way you improve is you do Kaizen events, right? And Kaizen event is the improvement. And it wasn't. Those are really training events. The Kaizen event was to teach us how to do improvement. And it was pretty amazing experiences. The stuff that would happen between the start and the end. And then it was really fascinating to see the people involved in the Kaizen at the wrap-up meeting present what they've done and what they've learned from what they've done. And it was just an amazing learning experiences. But TSSC's ability and Bryant and Cindy and all of them, Satoko, all of their ability to teach in that way was just amazing. And I'd like to think maybe I learned enough to do a little bit of that myself, but you got to do that a lot to get really good at it.
So is there a story perhaps that you could share with us that sort of involves kind of changing how you thought about work?
Yeah, I think there's probably two I'd like to share. And one of those seems insignificant, but is huge. And the other one was just huge. So, we've all heard about quick die change. Well, we were pretty typical. We had, it was a progressive stamping facility. So they'd have some pretty complex parts. We were making some heat sinks that were multiple parts that would get threaded and assembled in these dies. So you'd have two different materials coming in. So they'd not only stamp like three different parts, they'd also assemble them and thread them and stuff. So our typical mode of operation was that we would run these presses, and we'd have maybe an order. This was for consumer electronics. We'd have an order for 100,000 pieces. Well, we had the die in there. The dies are running. Man, since these dies are running so well, we better keep them going. So we would run these dies and run these dies and run these dies, and maybe we'd quit them at 250,000 parts. Well, finally, what would happen was there'd be a problem with the die. Something would break, and you'd shut it down, and you'd take it to the tool room, and you'd say, hey, guys in the tool room, please fix this die. But there was no urgency because you just ran 250,000 parts, so it would go back on the shelf. Well, the next time you go to run the die, you put it in the press and discover there's a problem. So all of that type of thinking and that type of operation would result in die exchanges that took literally 2 shifts. So 2 8-hour shifts in order to go from one part to the next part after you drop that in and you put the new die in, and then you run it and you try to buy off on the parts and you find out there's problems. It was something else. And what happened was through sequential Kaizen events and then the practice in between those and the incremental improvements in between those over probably a little longer than a year period. And this was basically a pilot project. We were able to get those die exchange down to consistently under 5 minutes. So think about that. We've got an operation where we're going from 2 shifts to do a die exchange down to under 5 minutes. So the obvious result of that is that we would dramatically shrink the batch size. So the batch size would then drop down to about 30 minutes. And then we had all of these dies dedicated to this single press. And it to me, the most fascinating learning experience is when you start running like that, you do these rapid die exchanges. Basically what happens is all parts are in production all the time. And conceptually, that's what you end up with. So die exchange is just a brief interruption. But in effect, from a quality perspective and everything else, it no longer becomes batch production, even though technically they are batches, a couple thousand parts or a few hundred parts. But it conceptually becomes all parts are in production at all times. And it really totally changes things. And I think the thing that stood out the most for me was the impact that has on quality. I mean, there were just no defects anymore. They went to nothing. And it's just because everything was current. Everybody remembered how to do everything. It was amazing. I think one of the most interesting things about it is we were a very machismo type of operation, and the press operators had been doing it for so long the same way that no kid coming in like me would be able to influence that. So we chose 2 people because of their attitude and aptitude, which is something, kind of a philosophy we've continued on with Doing American, is choose people because of their attitude and their aptitude. So it was the funniest thing because the press operator that made this all possible was a woman. And there was no women press operators. And so she started doing it, and then she had a great attitude. She's like, what's wrong with you guys? I can do this. And so everybody else was forced to buy off on it because she was making the guys look like they didn't know what they were doing. So it was really great. Just the other story I wanted to share real quick. There was a lady that worked for TSSC that was just fantastic, Satoko Watanabe, and she was so persistent. And there was one little production cell in a different area in the plant. We had this one little tray of parts, and she walked by there, and it was a little bit away from the operator. So she walks over and she pushes it 2 inches closer to the operator. And then a little while later, I come back and I see the operator and he pushes it back to where it was. And she comes by again and pushes it forward again. And so through this Kaizen event, this went on for several days. Every time she'd walk by there, she'd push it a little closer to the operator. And eventually we see it getting pushed back. And it was the funniest thing. And then I knew what she was kind of getting at. And we had a meeting at the end. And I remember the operator saying, "What's the big deal about 2 inches?" And she said, "Well, how many parts are you making a day?" And if you take the number of parts plus reaching to it and reaching from it, and you ask somebody to do that, several hundred parts a day, you're basically asking somebody to walk across your building and back for no reason whatsoever. When you add up all of that distance and all of that time, it seems like a little thing, but it's a pretty cool learning experience and something to teach to people.
I love it. So you've told me about some of the experiences that you were given back at that time to go visit NUMMI up in Fremont, California. You even had the opportunity to do some guest lecturing, as I understand it, for TSSC, kind of on behalf of TSSC. What did those experiences teach you about TPS in practice, in addition to what you were doing there at Walker, learn by doing?
I think the main thing, when I had an opportunity, it was the most amazing thing when at NUMMI to, I was very involved at the time with something called GAMA, which is the Golden State Automotive Manufacturing Association. And it was a group of companies all kind of working together to implement TPS. And I remember one time I went up to NUMMI and just was turned loose, and I just was able to walk around and just look and explore and follow information flow and material flow. And it was just amazing. And it was pretty early on. And I got to admit, I really don't know what I was looking at in a lot of cases, but it was just a great learning experience to engage with all the people there. And, I was told don't interrupt anybody in production, but it was just a lot of fun to watch and learn from. But I think for me, some of the most amazing experiences was there was I should have gone, and I'm not sure which year this was, but there was a production cell that we had great success on at Walker, and I was invited to go to Asheville and do a presentation. It was a whole group of manufacturers came in, and we rotated through these things, and I was asked to present the learning that we'd done in improving this Accuson cell, is what we called it. And it was so cool to do. First of all, but doing the same speech 5 times in a row is utterly exhausting. So I learned that. But it's just when you have to really think about what you've done and then present it and think about the learning that you had and try to present that in a way where you can share that with other people, it's just a really good experience. A lot of the listeners and stuff have the same thing. They're just working. You're just doing your stuff. You're making improvements, and then you go on to the next one. But you don't stop and really think deeply about what you did and how that could be applied in the future. And I think those experiences forced me to do that. I think I also, after leaving Walker, I did get invited to help teach a couple of TSSC seminars. And I guess my big takeaway from that is, what the heck am I doing here? Because I looked at these people like, they're just amazing, their knowledge, but it was just a privilege to even have anything to do with them. So, but obviously you learn a lot when you think. I mean, the best way to learn is to teach. So,
yeah, nice. How would you describe Mr. Oba's teaching style? And then has that influenced in any way your own leadership style today?
I'm sure, and I've heard, and Mark, you would know better than me, I'm sure Mr. Oba could be extremely demanding. But maybe not. I don't know. But dang, he seemed like a nice guy. I mean, I just loved being around him. He just seemed like a nice guy. And he took things so seriously. And there was such a sense about him really caring about not only the process and transferring the knowledge, but also a real caring for the people that were working within the process. And I just really appreciated that. And so I try to do that as much as I can moving forward with the folks we've got here. I think the other thing is dealing with him and dealing with TSSC knocked me down a couple of notches because, when you're a young engineer, I had my undergraduate degree is in industrial engineering, and you come out of college and you think you know everything. And it's really important over time. And I had some lean experiences before TSSC, which were pretty successful. But I think it's really important to realize you don't know everything. And I sure learned that. So good experiences.
Okay. I'm going to take it over here, Jon.
Okay. Did I answer that question all right?
We'll have to do another interview here with Jon, talk about what it was like to work with Mr. Oba versus work for Mr. Oba.
Yeah, anytime.
He was very demanding, but I learned a ton from him as well. I got a chance to work with him for many years, work for him, excuse me. So let's transition a little bit here, Jon, and talk about your company and about the founding of Do It America Manufacturing. What motivated you to start your manufacturing company in the U.S., and how did the TSSC experience kind of factor in that decision?
Okay. So I think like a lot of things, I mean, if you read any of the articles, the main reason that people leave a company is because of a bad boss, right? So I had an issue. It wasn't Walker. It was a subsequent company where it had a really bad boss, and none of us liked him. And so we basically kind of got together and decided let's do something else. And we put together a business plan and went to the owner and said, here's the business plan. He's not part of it. In the process, and everything turned out fantastic. It was really great. The owner, fantastic guy, things went the right way. But in the process of doing that, a couple of us started thinking about starting a company. And I'm not inherently an entrepreneurial person. My wife, though, very entrepreneurial, comes from a very entrepreneurial family, so very supportive. So we basically decided to quit perfectly good job in California, of all places, and start manufacturing. And it started in a garage, and things have gone really well. I mean, there were some tough times where, we got down to our last couple $100, and then things started to turn around, and it went really well. I think that kind of motivated it, and the attractiveness of entrepreneurship. I got a bite of that, and that was pretty cool. I think the other thing is that my parents had me when they were older than most parents. They had me in their 40s. So my parents were actually World War II generation. And, I remember my dad talking about manufacturing and how critical that was. I know there's a big push right now for manufacturing in the US, but I've always believed, and from the day we founded it, that's why we named this company with the funny name. We want to be a good example that you can and should manufacture in the US, and we believe that it can be done. So we have a mission, and I think it's really important to have a mission in whatever it is you're doing. If you don't have that, if you're in it just to make money, you're probably not going to make any. So you got to have a reason for existing, and that's what we're doing. I think the main contribution, to get to the other part of your question, from TSSC, what they really gave me is that the learning I had gave me the confidence to believe that we could do a manufacturing company and do it better than the people we're competing with. Because if you apply TPS and just some of the principles and you do a good job of that, people using traditional methods are not going to be able to compete with you. And it's proven true. So.
Well, Jon, let me just say before I go into this next question, whether you realize it or not, you've actually lived the TSSC mission and the dream. As someone who worked for TSSC a lot of my career, the reason Toyota set up TSSC was to help organizations to be able to improve the capability of manufacturing and keep manufacturing in North America. That was part of the mission. So you're living that mission. It's really great to hear everything you just said. Thank you. You often joke about not reading books, but clearly you've absorbed a lot of learning through practice. How has that hands-on approach served you as a leader?
Well, just to clarify something here, Josh actually
This was a
he
setup.
forced me to read this book,
I
The
did.
Work
That's
of
right.
Management by Jim Lancaster, and it's actually I'm not done yet. I'm only this far, but um, good book and some stuff in there I definitely want to implement. But no, I think just back to your question, I've always been hands-on. I started out my life, I studied architecture for 2 years. Since the day I was born, I was going to be an architect, and got into it and decided that wasn't really what I wanted to do. But one of the things I saw real quick is architects often know how to design a building, but have no idea how to build it. So I wanted to know how to build it. I wanted to know how to pound the nails. So to help put myself through college in the summers, I'd go work construction. So I'd spread joists or do framing or hang drywall or whatever it was. But I've always, whether it's working on cars or building houses or anything, I've always liked to jump in and do things. And I've always, the go and see mentality is kind of how I function. So I think the hands-on, you get in there, you learn deeply what's going on, and you really understand things, and you start to see how work is performed. I think when we started DIA, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, we couldn't depend on anybody to do anything, so we started the company. We started in a garage, and then we rented a little 3,300 square foot space and bent the conduit, pulled the wires, and ran the air lines and hooked up the machines. And I had to learn how to run a CNC because we didn't have a CNC guy. So, we just did it all. And I think to this day, that's still the way I kind of function. And the people that we've hired, that's part of the thing, is we hire them to function like that. So just a couple of days ago, I was out in the shop, and we had a fairly new lady out there working, and she was in the back. She was doing some packaging of some parts. And so I went back and joined her on that. And I saw the way she was working. It looked a little awkward. So I went over there and moved some things around and reconfigured it. And then we started working together. And so I'm standing there packaging parts with her. And she's like, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Jon. It's nice to meet you." And she goes, "What do you do?" And I go, "Well, I kind of mainly involved in sales these days, but I like to work in the shop, and I'm one of the owners of the company." She's like, "Are you serious?" And she's like, "I've never seen an owner actually do anything." And so when you do that, I think it really helps the folks in the shop realize that you're no different than them. You just do different things, but they really appreciate it when you come out there. You get your hands dirty, and you understand what they're doing. So I've always continued with that attitude through my career, and it's worked well.
Hey, just a side note there, Jon. Speaking of books, a book I'd recommend you read is a book called Visual Thinking by Temple Grandin.
Yeah.
She's a professor, and actually she's a professor in potentially what your daughter's studying in Colorado, a highly functioning autistic person, pretty well known. She's written multiple books, but she classifies people into visual thinkers and verbal thinkers. And visual thinkers she classifies into like an engineer or an architect who can imagine what a building would look like, and the person who who can get in and build it, or make the machine or build the machine.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're in that latter category, and she basically, I mean, she's a scientist. She basically says there's brain science behind all that. Anyway, what were some of the early challenges you faced when you were building your company rooted in TPS principles?
Well, I don't think there were challenges because of TPS, or there weren't challenges necessarily implementing TPS. I think the challenges were the typical challenges that small companies have when you have no resources, right? I think the TPS type of thinking actually is why we were successful. I mean, our very first contract with a large utility out here in Southern California was making really simple products called, they're just basically guard posts. They're ballards. They go around meters to keep cars from running into them. It's a piece of pipe that gets cut to length and deburred and powder coated, and some reflective tape gets put on it, and maybe some labels and stuff. So it's not a very complex thing, but it's big and bulky. And the utility came out to visit us, and it's a funny story. We had friends come and help us because we needed to look like we were bigger than we were. But little tiny facility, we're competing against, I mean, we're 3,300 square feet. We're competing against a company down the street that has 100,000 square feet. Well, how in the heck are we going to do this in this little tiny facility with this big stuff? I mean, they basically bring a truckload of pipe in and process it. And how are we going to do that? So we use some really basic, TPS principles as far as how to set up the work and do the work and coordinate the work and control the material. And it allowed us to do it in small batches and be competitive. So we put it together, brought them out, showed them, and they're like, okay, you have the contract. And because of that TPS thinking, we got that first contract with the utility customer.
That's great.
So let's talk a little bit more, Jon, about how TPS lives inside your company. Kind of a core principle would be customer first. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how customer first shows up in Do It American.
Yeah, so we have a set of core values that we didn't really impose on the company. We kind of we developed it as we moved forward. But one of those core values is that we don't have customers or suppliers. We truly have partners, and we try to think about it that way. So that, I mean, we're talking about the utility we're supplying product for, and we're talking about the suppliers that are supplying to us. It's the same relationship. It's just you're on the other side. So those are very important things, but we talk about it a lot too, just internally about, in this part of the shop, who's your customer? You as an engineer, who's your customer? So there's customer supplier relationships all throughout the organization. And if you've got a customer first mentality, how do you have a service mentality to make sure that their needs are taken care of and you're responding to them quick enough? So I think it's kind of throughout our organization, we try to encourage that. And, we're not always perfect, but we do a pretty good job. I know we get calls all the time from our actual end user customers with all kinds of new issues. And we're the ones they want to solve the problems and become the supplier for, because they know they're going to get taken care of, and we'll figure it out. We won't stop till we have an answer. So, it's a big part of what we do.
How about respect for the worker, respect for the work? How does that show up in Do It American?
That also fits into the core values. It's definitely something we do. We try to be extremely open with our employees. We try to we share with them. One of the biggest things we do is we do a profit sharing. You got to be careful with that. It's pretty significant profit sharing. It's not like $50. It's quite a bit of money we put in a pool, and we spread that amongst all the employees on a quarterly basis. And the reason we do that instead of at the end of the year is we want people to see on a more frequent basis how we're doing. But the thing you got to do is you got to very carefully tie the results to how we're performing. And everybody needs to know if there's a problem, if there's not enough sales, if we have a quality issue, or something goes wrong where we're not running as efficient. How does that impact that profit? And the only way you can do that is communicate, like over communicate. And so we do that stand-up meetings every morning. We do that a big, serious meeting where all of us get up and talk about the status of the business and what happened last quarter, what's happening next quarter, what are we looking at in the next couple of years. So I think that is very important.
And then how about?
Did I answer your question fully there?
Yeah, nice question. And I had the chance to come visit you and walk the shop floor with you. I mean, the respect that I saw that you have for the work that your people do, for the people who are doing that work, was just in abundance. I mean, the kind of the pride that you took in walking me around, introducing me to your team members, asking them to share with me some recent like Kaizen or improvement that they had made to their workstation. I mean, there was so much evidence that the work is really valued and seen as important, and the people who are doing it really own it and own the improvement day in and day out. I thought it was just awesome. So along those lines, maybe you could talk a little bit about how kind of problem solving in the work happens and how you tie that in with quality, productivity, that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I think to back up a little bit, one of the things we do with the people is a lot of people, there's these skills gaps that people talk about, and they can't find the right people. We can't find the machinist, we can't find the welder. One of our parts of our thing that we do is we always talk about attitude and aptitude being everything. The skills can be learned. And so most of the people that you met when you came out and walked through the shop, what they're doing, they've learned here. There's very few people that have come in here as, hey, I'm a skilled, I have skills in this specific area. They might have had some manufacturing experience, but we generally train everybody on everything. Yeah. And so right from the start, they start to understand. I think getting to problem solving, it's really important to do a couple of things. One is be responsive. I mean, we have these and-ons throughout the shop. If anybody gets into any trouble with anything, the process isn't working, there's defects, there's material issues, they hit a button and an audible sound starts going off and a light starts flashing and the sound gets louder and louder and louder. Nobody responds to it until it drives you nuts and the office unloads and comes and sees what's going on. But the point is, if you're responsive to the people, then they're more willing. And if you don't blame them, they're much more willing to share and help become part of the problem-solving solution. And it works really well. So I think one thing we've done is we have taken the fear away. We've got some employees that came from other companies, which were truly bad cultures. And I think I shared that story with you when you were out here, but it's just fascinating how long it takes to unlearn what goes on if somebody works in a really bad culture where they get beat up for making a mistake or causing a defect. You can't do that. You gotta, okay, well, let me help you. Let's see what the issue is. There's work instructions. Did we train you right? Do we have the right work instructions? Is the workstation set up right? Is the material okay? Did things get on time? Are you rushed? There's so many different things that can go into contributing to a defect. And you need to explore all those things. And I think what we found is that, most problems do have multiple contributing factors. It's very hard to say that's the one that caused that. The other thing that we do try to do is, I think one of the most amazing slides that TSSC shares is there's a slide they show on problem solving where they have the cone where you have to ask and get down to point of cause, and you can actually, there, I saw it. I saw the defect happening. And then you can start asking your 5 whys. Most people get out there and they start doing that too quickly, and they don't even have the problem defined. So why are you asking why if you don't even know what the problem is you're looking at? And that problem is probably just one of those multiple contributing factors. So you've got to go through that exercise a few times. So anyway, we got a long ways to go there, but I think we're doing all right.
Great. Well, let's scope out a little bit from not just talking about TPS, but the big picture is, America's trying to do more manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And I think there's companies in the US that worry about competing with some other lower cost countries. How do you think TPS principles have helped you or can help other organizations close that gap?
Yeah, it drives me nuts because there's always there's this prevailing paradigm that it can't be done here, right? And it's wrong, I think. I think it can be done here. I mean, there's, relationships between companies and all that, between countries and, and all that, where maybe there's some unfair trade practices, and hopefully some of those are being addressed. But I think, TPS, it always helps you close that gap because it makes it more competitive, makes you more competitive. And I just think one of the things that we do is we don't look at, we're so used to in the US, looking at labor hours. Why do you apply burden to a product based on the amount of labor in it? Right? That's how we do cost accounting. I don't understand it. Because the labor is usually, if you look at the overall product, it's usually the smallest component, right? You've got material and you've got outside process, you got all this stuff, and that labor is usually the smallest component. But then you make it seem really big because you allocate overhead to it as a function of that. So then all of a sudden you think, hey, we better ship this overseas, and then you find out, well, wait, I didn't actually get rid of that overhead. I still got it. And I've seen that happen in places I've worked. So I think it's really understanding that and, implementing the TPS principles and actually doing it. There's no reason why we can't do it here. I believe that. And so far it's working. There's been some stuff that we've reshored that everybody assumes you can't make here, and we've been able to make it here. So.
That's great. That's good to hear. Hopefully it's helpful for everyone else out there too.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap things up a little bit and do a little reflection. Looking back, and now you've got your own company. You're pretty successful with that organization. Congratulations. But what's one lesson from Mr. Oba that you still rely on today?
I think after most of my experiences were over at, with Walker and all that, and I went on to another next step in my career and went to work for somebody else. Mr. Oba came out to visit where I was working, and it was the nicest thing. Walked through the shop with him, and I asked him a really maybe cocky question. I don't know. I just said, "Hey, Mr. Oba, what do you think of my knowledge? Do you think am I pretty good? I was asking him, am I hot shit or not? Use a bad word. Sorry about that. I don't know if you can do that in one of these things." But his answer was, no, you really don't know very much, but you know enough to be successful. And I'll never forget
that. Sounds like a Mr. Oba answer.
It was a great answer because it's true. I mean, and if you think you've learned it all, you might as well just die. I mean, there's no reason to be around anymore. So, I mean, the amount of stuff you can learn is staggering compared to what you know. And quite frankly, I think I forgot more than I know anyway, because there's, in thinking about this thing and going back and thinking of the experiences, you have to really work hard to remember everything that you did. But I think that stuck with me and humbled me and realized that I really don't know that much. And I know a little. And I do believe that, part of our success is we can implement where our competition can't do this because they have no understanding. And if they have no understanding and we have some understanding, they don't have a chance against us. And we sell product with lead times that are just a few weeks, where they're like 12 months. It's crazy. So, you get the work when you can do that. I think that was just my single biggest learning moment, was when he said that.
Great. Well, but I'm sure Mr. Oba, if he was around, would say to you, this is a continuous improvement. So even though you think you're a lot better than everyone else now with those lead times, everyone else is improving too.
That's true.
So tell us what's next for Do It America Manufacturing and where you're focusing your improvement efforts to make sure you're continued to be successful.
Right now, I guess there's kind of two things. We're trying to perfect. I mean, perfect is probably a bad word, but we're working hard on our pull system internally to help control things. And I think we've done a pretty good job, but we're refining our conveyance routes. I was actually working on it a little bit this morning with one of the folks that's setting that up. But we've got it in place, but we're always improving that, and that's kind of the lifeblood of the company, to communicate information throughout our manufacturing operation. Josh, I really like this book you told me to read about management routines. So we are very seriously looking at getting that going. So I'm hoping the next time you guys come and see us, we'll have that in place, and be starting down that journey to be doing some of those kind of things. Because I think that's one area we've set up the company and we have performed, and because of that, tons of opportunities open up to us. But we don't have really, here's our strategy and what we want to do moving forward. So we need much better management routines, and we need to start thinking about the Hoshinkanri type of thinking and planning and that kind of stuff. Or we are entering, I think, a pretty critical time. We've grown and we've gotten in 3 buildings. Wouldn't it be great to be in one consolidated building where we can organize things a little better? And just the growth and the opportunities, and we've got some new equipment coming in and things like that. So there's just a lot of change. Well, every time you come and see us, we always look different. So.
Well, it was really great having you on, Jon. Your history with, of course, working with Toyota, but also with your own initiative and your found entrepreneurial spirit that you found through this is wonderful to hear. Thanks a lot for being with us.
Yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you.
You and your company are really an inspiration for us. So thanks for sharing your story with us on this podcast.
Thank you much. Enjoyed the opportunity. Nice to chat about it.
All right, Jon. Bye for now.